Our next guest is here from the American Media Institute, and he's here to talk about establishment bias, why MSNBC and the rest of the media loves big government, and how to challenge them with real reporting. So we hope to give you some more information that you can take with you on how you can counter the media, or the narrative that the media wants to put out there. And I'd like to welcome to the stage, and please encourage all of you to give a warm round of applause to Rich Miniter from the American Media Institute.
Hi, guys. Hey, thanks a lot. 15 minutes isn't a lot of time, so I'm going to talk very quickly. Even though I live in Virginia, I'm from New York originally, so I've got the New York pace. Sorry about that. Okay, quick question. How many people remember the story of Romney putting the dog on the roof of his car? How many people remember the story of Romney shutting down Bain Capital for 3 days to search for a kidnapped girl and finding her in a basement in New Jersey? Yeah, both of those stories are true. One gets about 30,000 mentions on Google. The other gets around 1,000. That is media bias, folks. Now, I'm not going to try to persuade this audience that the media is biased because, well, is there anyone here who thinks the media is not biased? Right. The laughter says it all, right. Now, I do not believe that there is a liberal bias in the media. The media does not have a liberal bias. What it has is an establishment bias. The media, which is supposed to be a growling watchdog, has turned into a shih tzu, a lapdog of all those in power. And it does not look critically at any of our institutions anymore. And that's a major failure. I don't know if you guys remember the Bush years. We talked about intelligence failures all the time. No one talks about media failures, the things they should be reporting that they're not. The failure to hold people, especially leaders, and institutions accountable. Now, since time is short, let me tell you, I'm a recovering journalist myself. I was at the Wall Street Journal, I was at the Sunday Times of London, I turned around a division of the Washington Times, I've written a bunch of best-selling books. I love the media, but I think it needs to be saved from itself. It has to get back to the business of holding institutions accountable. Now, here's where you come in. Everyone writes op-eds. Op-eds are great, but that's opinion. What we're short on is news, real reporting, digging into things, finding the truth, the facts, the evidence, and presenting it in a compelling, comprehensive, but still concise fashion. In other words, a genuine news story. And news stories begin with powerful questions. Here's a question. Why does it cost $60,000 a year to educate one student in college or university? Why does it cost $60,000? How much are they paying the unionized lawnmower guy? How much are they paying the unionized person who scoops out that poisonous-looking mashed potatoes in the cafeteria? Why does it cost $60,000 or $70,000? That's a legitimate news story. Someone should look into that. Why is it that we're spending over $1 billion a year in new construction for the Veterans Administration, and there's a long line of veterans who can't get medical help? As you begin to ask these questions, to hold people accountable, hold institutions accountable, you're beginning a news process. And if you start to assemble the facts and the evidence can speak for itself. Now, here's why I'm urging you to take a look at news instead of opinion. Everyone in this room knows what an op-ed is. I'd ask you to put your hands up, and you all know what an op-ed is. If we went out on the sidewalks of Denver right now, how many people would know what an op-ed is? Right. One or two, maybe. Exactly. Look, the most popular sections of any newspaper, in this order, are obituaries, letters to the editor, sports. Very rarely is op-ed in the top 10. And by the way, the world is saturated with opinion. You know the old joke, everyone has an opinion just like they have. There's a lot of opinion. There's not a lot of news. What people are hungry for is news. The people in the news business, the reporters, they're not supplying it, or they're not supplying it in large doses. They're taking the press releases from those government agencies and just rewriting them and quoting the experts who are saying everything's fine. The only thing these wonderful government agencies need is more money. Well, I don't think they need more money. I think they need more accountability. And to get more accountability, you need more reporting. Millions of people who are not connected with one side of the political spectrum or the other look at news. They never look at op-eds. That's a reachable audience. That's a teachable audience. You can begin a conversation with them by treating them respectfully and intelligently and giving them facts and evidence and supplying the facts and evidence and the accounts that the news won't. And here's another secret. Your local paper, your local radio station, even your local TV station, they're starved for content right now. 40% of all news jobs have disappeared since 2001. 40%. Most investigative teams have been disbanded. That's why I started the American Media Institute. We finance and distribute original investigative reporting. We supply USA Today, US News and World Report, and more than 100 other newspapers in Colorado. We supply content to the Colorado Springs Gazette, so we're about to print our first story with them in coming weeks. We also supply content to 218 African-American newspapers and African-American magazines like Ebony, Jet, Heart and Soul, Monarch. We thought it was important to start a conversation with that audience. Your local newspaper, your local radio station, your local TV, they're hungry for content. If you bring them something they can use, they will use it. Think about, if we talk about citizen journalism, and mostly that just means bloggers spouting off. What if we meant it when we said citizen journalists? You're all experts in your local area. What if you started digging into how the institutions in your area were acting and behaving and begin to hold them accountable? Ordinary citizens can file Freedom of Information Act requests and the state equivalents. You can go down and knock on doors. You can interview patients at the VA. We can sit around and complain and ask the journalists to do the job that they're supposed to do they haven't done in years, or we all can start doing it. The reason why I wanted to come and talk to you today, and I've got a few minutes for questions, is I wanted to urge you to think about getting into the news business. Think about becoming at least a part-time reporter. Think about holding the institutions in your community, in your state, in your government accountable. Because if you don't do it, no one else will. I'm happy to take any questions. Not a single question. Not even a denunciation about how unrealistic my idea is?
I haven't gotten to the mic yet. As a millennial, we don't read newspapers, let's be honest. Our media consumption is in a completely different format. And you mentioned, journalism jobs dropping, 40% over the last 10 years. My fiance, God bless her soul, is a news reporter. But in a world where media and news is completely decentralized, and most people here consume the media that they want to hear, how does the profit model, as we keep seeing, how do you stop news outlets from only printing stories that their viewers want to hear versus the news stories that they need to be publishing? How do you address the profit incentive?
Well, the profit incentive should actually work in your favor because they're hungry for new content that actually that is local, that holds local institutions accountable. They're going to double check your facts and evidence. But we've certainly had a lot of success at the American Media Institute in getting papers to publish our stories. There are 122 groups on the left, the biggest of which is ProPublica, which publish stories in newspapers, and that's more nonprofit journalism. In fact, they have their own trade association, the Institute for Nonprofit News. There's so many on the left supplying content to the news business. But let me jump in on one other thing. First of all, millennials are not unusual in not reading the paper. You go back to 1900 and you look at any decade, people under 35 were not reading the paper. They had other things to do. Think about where you were between 20 and 35. You're thinking about what your career is going to be, who are you going to spend the rest of your life with, who are you as a person. But 35, you have a mortgage, you have a spouse possibly, a child, and you start to look around the world and realize that things affect you. That's why the talk radio audience begins at 35, the political magazine audience begins around 35, that's why voting increases around the age of 35. So I don't see a big crisis that millennials don't read because they're acting like every other generation in recorded history. It's not unusual. And frankly, why should they care? Secondly, social media. What's the largest source of content on social media? Newspaper content. Radio and TV, where do they get their content from? Newspapers. The only difference is this time the newspapers are not making money from it. But all these things on social media, on Facebook, on Twitter, that's where they're all coming from. The largest, if you look at Drudge in any given year, more Drudge links go to the New York Times and the Washington Post than any other news source. Yes?
I point out that a lot of state, federal, local agencies publish statistics and reports that nobody apparently reads, but they're all online. But I have found, for example, I wrote a diary for Red State, so if you want to get published, join Red State and you can publish. But, okay, the Obama administration has filed half as many lawsuits for discrimination as were filed under the Bush administration during the same period of time. I don't know how to make that a sexy story. To me, that's an outrage. That means they're talking, and they're coming out here and telling you about equal pay for women, but they're not using the agency that they have, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, whose job it is to eliminate pay discrimination. They're not doing it.
That's a legitimate news story. You could get a mainstream media outlet interested in that story if you had assembled the facts and evidence and did some interviews. That's a great story.
And another one is, again, statistics from, and these are based on agency reports. This is the EEOC's own reports, the ATF, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. Again, significantly lower levels of enforcement as measured by lawsuits filed, actions filed.
Yeah, we have a story in development called Time to Crime. The ATF actually tracks when a gun leaves the legal market and how long it takes before it shows up at a crime scene. And I think the national average is about 11 and a half years. But states with the toughest gun control have some of the shortest time to crime. Again, these are government statistics. And the endless source of great news stories if you actually read the government's reports. Yes?
Yeah, I write a satire blog called the Pundit Pete Press Service. So very similar to most media outlets, our editorial policy is truth has consequences, which is why we try and stay away from it as much as possible. But I just want to encourage other people as citizen journalists. I have kind of a weird sense of humor, but I have successfully gotten into White House press conferences and asked real questions, not satire questions. You can do this. Other people can do it. I can tell you how to do it. I've also scooped a couple little things that kind of became little national news stories just by seeing something odd and going like on the White House website and start to compare statements and stuff, and all of a sudden you find some inconsistency, some flaw, and you put it out. Now, in my case, nobody listens, but then someone like Katie Pavlich picks it up when you tweet her or something. And all of a sudden, you have successfully created some news by finding a flaw in government or what they're saying. Right. And anyone can do that. And so I would encourage people, just do it.
That's a great point, Ed. Sorry, I'm out of time. But comparing deeds to rhetoric, you can always generate a news story that way. And that's the accountability that these government agencies never face. So if you're going to think about changing the world, think about being a news reporter. Thanks.